I wanted to cover a number of different issues in a very brief period of time. But last year, our campaign put out a report called Undervalued and Underpaid, which I think is an apt description of the human services workforce in New York State. And I'm going to go through some of the statistical information because there's nothing people love more on a Saturday afternoon than a good round of statistics in order to get us going, right? All right. Yay, the statistics. So I want to talk about the fact that about 20% of the state's workforce is actually in the nonprofit sector, representing about 1.3 million jobs. This is obviously a broad array of nonprofits. We're focused more on the human service nonprofits in New York State, and in terms of human service employment alone, that human service employment has about doubled since 1990 in New York State, increasing from about 166,000 jobs to about 332,000 jobs in 2016. So it actually rose by about 82% in New York City, while the suburbs and upstate saw about 129% growth rate in those jobs. So clearly a big segment of our workforce is wrapped up in human services as well. Right now, human service job growth occurred primarily among nonprofit organizations that work under public contract, right? They're providing services under a public contract for New York State. And about 21% of all private job growth in the suburbs and upstate was in this workforce, and 10% of New York City's private job growth was in this workforce. So sadly, this workforce is grossly underpaid, and that has a lot to do with the fact that the state is not increasing money for contracts for these folks, and the average annual pay for human service workers ranges from about 23 to 25,000 in upstate New York, about 27,000 in Hudson Valley and Long Island, and almost 30,000 in New York City. But the reality is that falls far short of what we would consider a living wage in New York, and is only about 40% of the average for all workers, and it falls short of the income needed to meet the United Way's ALICE standard. Which I could talk about later. I don't have time to talk about now. But this workforce itself is overwhelmingly women. So we've heard a lot from the governor this year about creating equal pay for women, fighting for women's rights. Yet, 80% of this workforce are women, and literally about 46% are women of color. And too many of these folks are able to qualify for public assistance benefits, the same benefits that oftentimes they're helping to provide to their clients, they qualify for as well. And I think that's a horrible thing, that these folks aren't being paid enough that they're actually qualifying for public assistance benefits. And this is an educated workforce, right? 40% have 4-year degrees, another 25% have an associate's degree or some college. So again, undervalued and underpaid, an apt description of this sector. So a couple of other things to keep in mind. The New York's largest nonprofit human service providers, about 80% have budgets that are 90% or more state funded. So when the minimum wage rises, we need to compensate for that by increasing state contracts. Yet, for some reason, we refuse to increase state contracts, and we really need to do so. So, almost literally like half of state contracts or nonprofits that have been surveyed say that, half of them say that their state contracts don't cover the costs of the programs that they're providing. Yet we're doing so on behalf of the state at a lower cost. There's also significant turnover issues because of the fact that the pay is low, and retention has been difficult as well because of the low pay. So New York State can do a lot and needs to do a lot more than it's doing right now. One of the problems that we have is we're living under this kind of self-imposed 2% state spending cap. And I know, people don't like to talk about it that much, but this is not in statute, it's not in law, It's something that the legislature basically concedes to each year on the part of the governor's wishes, but the reality is, if you look at the impact of the 2% state spending cap, it's having a severely negative impact on human services across the board, and particular state agencies that are providing these human services. So, between 2011 and 2017, we've seen kind of this precipitous drop in funding as a result of the 2% spending cap. Because when education goes up 4 or 5%, when healthcare goes up 4 or 5%, the reality is, since those two make up half of the outlays of our state budget, everything else is going down, and it's really been human service agencies that have really taken a bath. And when you look at inflation-adjusted dollars, right, if we had just continued to spend a modest 2.1% increase between the way we were between 2007 and 2011. If we had done that between 2011 and 2017, we'd actually have $1 billion more to spend on social services in New York State. So social services have really been getting short shrift, and we need to turn that around. So I'll stop there. Thank you.